This episode is sponsored by Bible Bricks. They've created a brick building set of the Wilderness Sanctuary. Yes, the one from Exodus. With around 1,200 pieces, custom minifigs, and instructions that include Bible verses explaining each part of the tabernacle as you build. The set launches on Kickstarter May 6th, and if you put down just $5 now, you'll get $20 off when it goes live. Check it out at BibleBricks.shop or click the link in the description.
Hey guys, welcome to Seeking What They Sought. I'm here with Eric and Anthony and Sean. It's just us today. It's just us. And we're going to be talking about...
Just the boys.
We're going to be talking about the Sanctuary Doctrine today. And I mean, pretty much, if you have been Adventist, you either know a lot about the Sanctuary Doctrine, you know kind of what it is maybe, or you know nothing. And you're just like, what is that? I know I'm supposed to believe in it. But we're going to be talking about this today. I mean, pretty much, I don't know about you guys, but the Sanctuary Doctrine for me was something I was never really talked to that much about. Like, people talked about it, but I never got like educated in it as a kid.
Like
I never
Sabbath.
got I never got the indoctrination, right? So,
You feel like you didn't? Because I feel like I did, but it wasn't clear. It's like
no, you're right. Now that you say that, I did.
Yeah.
I definitely did. Yeah.
It's like you're saying words, but you're like, what do the words mean?
No, actually, I never did.
Oh, you never-
I was just going with
You were just
no.
oh my word.
Starting a sentence and see where it ends
No,
up.
I never did. But you did apparently.
I don't know if I mean, I was definitely it was definitely brought up. It was definitely spoken about in church and in school, but that doesn't necessarily mean it made sense.
I mean, yeah, I guess I knew the basics of it. So, like there's a sanctuary, Jesus in there somewhere, something happened in 1844. Like that's what I knew.
Right.
Those.
Well, that's it.
things.
That's all you need
That's
to know.
I mean,
Let's end the episode
Not
right
wrong.
there.
We solved it.
Right. No, I agree. I think it was, one of those things he kind of like knew about, but was never really explained well or in depth.
yeah.
It always just kind of, to me, felt like, oh, we messed up with our 1844 prediction. So here's like, oh, it was probably this instead. Like,
Yeah,
and
for
I
sure.
realize I'm sure it's deeper than that, but at a surface level, it's I always kind of felt about it. I was like, it feels like the backup
is and it
plan.
It is and it isn't, Eric.
The cover story.
It's both
The
deep
cover story.
and not at all. It's literally, oh crap, Jesus didn't come back when we thought he would, and then
Now what?
walking through a field. Hey, I think we got the date right. I think we just got the thing wrong, and something happened that we can't see or confirm,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what happened. So that's exactly what happened. So
Yeah. Yep.
there we go.
So what are we going to do about it? Man, well, that's
Eric,
how are we going to solve this issue?
Eric handed it to us as if we can solve.
Look, guys, I don't know what's going on. You guys are the theologians, so
That's
Well,
fair.
yeah.
I know that I nowadays, as an Adventist pastor, I mean, just to be honest, this is actually sort of serious. I'm going to also joke around a little bit, but like part of my thing on this podcast is I just want to be honest about where I'm actually at. And
Mm.
I think these days I'm definitely skeptical, and there's a lot more of me. That sounded weird. There's a lot.
skeptical on the sanctuary
There
doctrine.
is a lot more of you these
There's
days.
a lot more of
Jesse.
me. I don't know what. Yeah, I'm skeptical on
Your
sanctuary.
kids
and
will
there's a
do to
lot-
you.
there's a lot more people like me that are hired by the church like a lot of people in the circle of people that I've run into have questions, aren't quite sure about it, don't have the greatest perception of it, and
Yeah.
they're like Adventist pastors and stuff. So I'm outing everybody and you'll never know. You'll never know who's just walking around. I'm telling you, but you'll never know actually who. No, I mean, it's actually kind of wild because you guys have told me this, and I never thought of it this way until Sean and Anthony, you guys said this. I think it was you, Sean. You said the Sanctuary Doctrine is the only truly unique Adventist doctrine.
Yeah.
Which is pretty interesting because we have our 5 distinctives. I guess no, but like Spirit of Prophecy is unique, isn't it? But anyways,
I actually don't know if I agree with that, but we can carry on.
Shut up.
Agree with which
Spirit
part?
of Prophecy.
I don't know.
Hold on.
Hold
on. We got Spirit of Prophecy, Sanctuary. Those are the 2 that are like definitely different. Then we have Sabbath, State of the Dead, and Second Coming. So Sabbath, State of the Dead, and Second Coming are definitely more accepted in other contexts. Yeah. But those 2, Spirit of Prophecy and Sanctuary, seem to be like the 2 like definitely distinctive beliefs within Adventism. And so anyways, that's pretty interesting because Sanctuary is one of those things that I think a lot of people are totally sure on it, and a lot of people are not bought into it. And there's a lot of people in the middle who are just kind of like, I don't know.
Yeah, it's the most divisive.
Yeah.
So for the people who are even further removed than me, maybe can you give us a really brief overview of what the Sanctuary Doctrine is? Just to start out, just like a really basic framework.
Anthony, you're the theologian.
Oh boy. I mean, I think probably what's most helpful is if we base it off of the actual statement.
Is that a Bud?
Wow.
She's drinking a Bud Light right now.
That was actually
Arnold Palmer, to be clear.
That was a perfect like soda can hiss pop open.
It was a
sound.
good sound. That was a good commercial sound.
Guys, I've been waiting for us to get into the most serious part of this conversation to just do that. I was waiting for it.
You're in one of those moods today. Jesse gets in these moods.
That's true.
Yeah.
Sorry, Anthony, our resident theologian.
Oh boy, I feel as if probably it's most helpful to like go based off of the statement from the Adventist Church, like fundamental beliefs. So
I have it right here if you want it.
Yeah, why don't we do that?
You want to read it off my computer screen?
Yeah, let me just dive into my own computer and come out in Redlands, California.
Pop your head out of my computer screen and look over at my monitor over here, if you could.
Let me go to that Google Doc. Okay.
Yeah, I got it. There is a sanctuary in heaven, the true tabernacle that the Lord set up, and not humans. That's the first kind of claim. In it, Christ ministers on our behalf, making available to believers the benefits of his atoning sacrifice offered once for all on the cross. At his ascension, he was inaugurated as our great high priest and began his intercessory ministry, which was typified by the work of the high priest in the holy place of the earthly sanctuary. In 1844, at the end of the prophetic period of 2,300 years, he entered the second and last phase of his atoning ministry, which was typified by the work of the high priest in the most holy place of the earthly sanctuary. And it is a work of investigative judgment, which is part of the ultimate disposition. I feel like I skipped something. It is a work of investigative judgment, which is part of the ultimate disposition of all sin, typified by the cleansing of the ancient Hebrew sanctuary on the Day of Atonement.
I think you're good.
In that typical service, the sanctuary is cleansed with the blood of animal sacrifices, but the heavenly things are purified with the perfect sacrifice of the blood of Jesus. The investigative judgment reveals to heavenly intelligences who among the dead are asleep in Christ, and therefore in him are deemed worthy to have part in the first resurrection. It also makes manifest who among the living are abiding in Christ, keeping the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus, and in him, therefore, are ready for translation into his everlasting kingdom. This judgment vindicates the justice of God in saving those who believe in Jesus. It declares that those who have remained loyal to God shall receive the kingdom. The completion of this ministry of Christ will mark the close of human probation before the second advent. How'd you feel about that one, Eric? Any clearer?
Can you explain it in baseball terms?
Sean, we'll kick that over to you.
Yeah. So there's this guy on first. He's.
I want to know where this is going.
He goes to heaven.
No,
he's got chewing tobacco. He's making signals over at the dugout. He's
I'm particularly curious how you're going to make this.
Let's let him go. Let him cook.
This is the thing is like it is so naturally complicated. Like it's a very unapproachable doctrine, and we're not trying to make a claim about its validity or not. We're going to have a conversation about that. But it's naturally very difficult for us to make stepping stones to progress forward and understand. Like we talked about our background when we learned about it, we didn't really know what we were learning about, whether we were kids or in high school, college. Like it's such a difficult thing to grasp. And we found this when we actually surveyed you guys on Instagram, and there were about half of you, maybe a little bit more than half of the people that we surveyed that said, yeah, I agree and I believe in the sanctuary doctrine. And then we had about 10-15% that said outright no. And then we had about 35, almost 40% say unsure. And that's really interesting. I think that's kind of the places. There's definitely some division, some lack of confidence in what it really is, and even some that have outright said no. There's a lot of history behind why that is. You think of Desmond Ford, in the history of Glacier View and what happened back in 1980. There was this split within the church when it came to specifically, like the investigative judgment. And I know that's one thing was we want to approach this in a way that hopefully makes sense as we break it down, and potentially it's going to be quite a few episodes when we go through this. This is not just going to be a one-time thing as we talk about how do we explain the sanctuary, because if we look at that fundamental belief when Jesse read that off, there's so much there. And if you go to the fundamental beliefs, you'll see all the texts that are being referenced, right? And so there's a long list there. And so what we're going to try to do is break it down a bit more, piece by piece.
Do you guys, just as like a fun little moment, do you guys want me to read off all the people who said no?
Yeah, we can just out them. Let's see. Adventist pastor.
Wait, Ted Wilson? Wait. I knew he always wanted to say it.
Oh, my word.
Yeah, it's...
Imagine.
But
Eric,
yeah, go ahead, Jesse.
Eric, to answer your question, Anthony?
I was going to say, Anthony...
What was your question?
Can you...
Explain in baseball terms?
No, but
I don't care about this.
Could you honestly just break it down into an elevator pitch of what the sanctuary doctrine is? Because that was a long statement that Jesse read.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It was hard for me to follow.
I understood every word.
And I am an exceptionally intelligent person, so for common folk.
Eric. I don't know why that sounded so condescending. Or I'm like, you are, Eric. I didn't mean it condescending. Yeah, I'll try my best. So, full disclosure, I feel like I'm still on the journey of learning how to articulate this in a way that makes sense, and because I actually don't think it's ever been articulated in a way that makes sense, and I did not understand it at all until seminary. So,
are you saying that the fundamental belief as it's written does not make sense in its articulation?
I think that there is a logical progression of thought, but I don't like how it. I don't like. It's not in normal people language, clearly, because we're.
I don't know. Maybe it isn't for you, but I understand. I get it.
Well, I'm responding to Eric, the non-theologian. So yeah, if I were to give an elevator pitch, I would probably say, "Hey, the main idea is that God has a way that He operates His government in the universe, and He has certain mechanisms and certain ways that He uses to operate the universe and kind of maneuver to like work the government, the mechanisms, the systems of the universe, and in create, and that kind of like space is a temporal space that exists in a heavenly realm. And when God was interacting with humans, He wanted to dwell with people. He had a desire to be Emmanuel, God with us. And so He made a reflection of that space on earth to dwell with humans. And through that space, we learn a lot about the way that He organizes the universe and about His plan for how to solve the sin issue. And through that space, we learn about the Jesus strategy, the Messiah strategy, and beyond, and God's whole ongoing plan to show that He really is love. So that's probably a shortened version that I would probably say.
I think
But-
Eric got off the elevator like 10 seconds ago.
I took the stairs. No. That was honestly that was much easier to follow. So
Was it?
Yeah,
Because
I mean,
because
it's still
it
I have a lot of
started off-
questions, but I feel like
There's a lot
it
more, but
was
that's probably what I would say.
more, normal
there.
people language for sure.
yeah.
was
And there-
it because it's like God has mechanisms by which he's got to jiggle the mechanisms of government. That was the language that you were using, Anthony.
Mhm.
That felt like it was introducing a whole different concept into the whole thing. Because what I see here is not what you said.
No, yeah. That's why I think this language is not helpful.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, that's
You
that's
heretic.
that's definitely a statement, and I think I tend to agree with you, Anthony. Even though, and for the record, as we do this little intro episode, is all four of us are in different spaces when it comes to
Yeah.
how we feel about the Sanctuary Doctrine, and I think that
Let's
actually
talk about that.
yeah
Let's talk about it.
Yeah, we should.
yeah
Eric, how do you feel about the Sanctuary Doctrine?
I mean, I think I already kind of said a little bit, but basically, I mean, to put it plainly, I grew up Adventist. I feel like I was more educated than maybe the average Adventist kid, in terms of our beliefs.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I feel like I definitely don't have a good understanding of it. Like, I could not articulate it well, and I definitely couldn't articulate why it's important or
Mhm.
how it's like meaningful. I feel like I could give like the basic idea of what it is, but not in any beneficial way. So I'm looking forward to this series and educating myself more and getting to know more about it, and then being able to make like an actual educated decision on how I feel about it. But,
yeah.
For sure, yeah.
And I know we give
Sean,
you. I know we
You've
give
been on
you.
an interesting journey.
Yeah, I was going to
Sorry,
say
yeah,
even
go for it.
before I get into that is I know Eric, we give you a hard time, but I actually had a pastor friend, not obviously one of you guys, but when I kind of disclosed to him that we were going to do a series on the sanctuary and investigative judgment, he was like, "Oh, thank you. Like, I've preached on it before, but I swear after about a couple weeks, I forget everything that I preached about it. Like, I lose grasp on what it is, and I feel like that. I'll be honest, that happens to me too. I just feel like naturally there's so much to it
Happens to me too.
that if someone were to ask, if it's not fresh on my mind where we've been studying or discussing it as a team or whatever, I'll just forget. Like, if someone were to come up to me like a student or a church member and say like, how do you explain this? I would have to like pause and be like, give me a minute. I need to refresh.
Yeah.
Like
if-
it's so, there's so much to it. Like, if you tell me to talk about Daniel prophecy or like individually, because there's so many components of sanctuary doctrine,
There's so many
like the
components.
investigative judgment. Part of that is the 2300-day prophecy, which is a larger portion of a bunch of smaller prophecies that go into that.
Yep.
And then
There's Day of Atonement.
yeah, there's Day of Atonement.
Huge.
And so there's so many pieces that go into the sanctuary doctrine that it's easy to lose sight of, like, big picture. What is this all pointing to? And the challenge is, Anthony, I think you did a good job sharing what you did. And there's no knock against how you described it to try to summarize it. But the problem is, if you go that big picture and summarize it that short, like, almost by nature, I feel like it's impossible. Maybe someone can prove me
It's
wrong
also,
and
it's
prove
not
us
the
wrong.
same thing. Like, it's inherently not the same thing as written over here. What you said.
Is it though?
That'll
It's not the same thing. That's what I'm
Well,
saying. It's like it's not.
Well, and that's the thing is, and that's why I said, full disclosure, I'm still learning how to articulate it in a
Yeah.
major, big picture way that I feel like communicates the heart of it. That is avoiding the weeds. 'Cause
that's
I
what
think
that's what
that's
makes
the
it more
challenge, right?
complicated. Is this doctrine? If you take again the labels of liberal and conservative, there are different interpretations within Adventism of how to apply this. What's the emphasis on? What's the takeaway practice for investigative judgment, for instance, where some will focus on the the concept of the book of life and the inherent fear that comes with, like, am I in the book of life? Is Jesus as high priest, like, investigate? Am I being investigated? Am I being judged? Versus the shift, that's happened. I don't know if it's happened more recently, but we've been hearing more the pattern that it's about us investigating God, understanding God's character, right? And so there's division. I would say there's division in Adventism, which makes it even more difficult. Is how do we interpret our own fundamental belief?
That's true.
And
Yeah.
it's even without that, it's complicated enough with all the different pieces. So going back to Jesse, what you said, my experience is growing up, I can't name one time before I started teaching post Walla Walla, post undergrad, that I really thought deeply about the sanctuary. And that was because I had a few colleagues that brought it up with me, and we did Bible studies and went and dug deep into it. And that was the first time I was like, oh, this is something that matters, and I'm aware of it, and it's really compelling and interesting, and I want to learn more about it. And there's so much here. That didn't happen until 6 or 7, maybe 8 years ago, that really happened for me. And
so you're totally indoctrinated. You're sold out. You're part of. You're in the cult.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely. I think both Anthony and I have had discussions.
You said that while receiving a paycheck from an Adventist institution. Your whole retirement is from the cult.
You're not wrong.
Yeah, I think my mind has continued to shift as I look at it. But I have maintained, and I've spoken with you, Jesse. I don't remember if it's been on air or not, but like I have at least understood the fact that I have a hard time reconciling how Adventism can stand on its own without the Sanctuary Doctrine, and how it's an exclusive.
I think you've said to me before that if we drop the investigative or the Sanctuary Doctrine, we don't have anything completely unique
on a doctrinal level. If we're talking social cultural, that's its own thing. Yeah. But if we're talking at a very foundational doctrinal level, I don't see another reason to at least label yourself as an Adventist if you reject fully the Sanctuary Doctrine.
Mm-hmm.
And
which is really interesting because I see what you're saying, and I think we've disagreed on this, but I also get what you're saying though. Like if you're talking doctrines, it really, I mean, I don't know what your thoughts were, Anthony, on like other truly unique parts of Adventism theologically, but
I disagree with the statement. There wouldn't be a truly unique reason to be Adventist without Sanctuary Doctrine, because I think from the ground up, the Adventist hermeneutic is fundamentally opposed to pretty much all of the history of Christianity. So to me, the very bones of the Adventist way of approaching Scripture is automatically divorced from and stands apart as a unique interpretive sort of strategy, because they're all, we talked a little bit about this before, almost all of evangelical Christianity, Catholic Christianity, going back all the way to the first century, interprets the Scriptures through a bunch of classical Greek presuppositions, whereas we don't. So to me, that's such a divergence in thinking that even without Sanctuary Doctrine, I think we would still be incredibly divergent from, we just approach the whole thing differently, I think.
Yeah, Sean.
Straight up.
Yeah, I mean, I see where you're coming from, Anthony. I would respond and say, I think as a byproduct, that's where Sanctuary comes from. If we didn't have that approach,
I agree.
I don't think we would have Sanctuary. And therefore, if we didn't have, again, I think it's like, chicken or egg thing. Like, could you really have Adventism as it stands, the way it was approached, without the Sanctuary as a lens for looking at pretty much everything else? The great controversy doesn't exist without the Sanctuary. The authoritative, if you believe in Ellen White being authoritative, or even just, as a prophet, whatever your spectrum of understanding of what the role of Ellen White in the church, last day events, it all is just wrapped in to this concept of the great controversy, this way of reading the narrative concept, the big picture story of the Bible and God's character. I just don't know that Adventism stands with that piece of God's character being fully removed.
I think though, if you take out,
well,
I think if you take out the Sanctuary Doctrine, I think you can still get to all the same stuff biblically. That's one thing that I don't like. For instance, the Sanctuary Doctrine sort of led to,
and I feel like I would say the opposite way, that the Sanctuary Doctrine is biblically how we get to that stuff.
But I think that's how we got there. I don't think it's the only way to get there. Like
Oh,
for instance, we got to Sabbath, and then we get the State of the Dead through Sanctuary. There was like at least a couple of them that we got to some of our views.
Some
What's
key
that?
text. There's definitely some key text, but I'm forgetting the process of State of the Dead.
But I remember after the Sanctuary, some of our sort of distinctive things that came out of that come from the Sanctuary idea. But then, like for instance, State of the Dead, which I believe is one of them, but I think or is it Sabbath? I don't even remember which ones it is. But I remember thinking when I heard that, I was like, no, but you can get to that biblically without the Sanctuary Doctrine. You don't have to get there through that, though the Adventist pioneers did. And so that was an interesting. I don't remember. I think I heard it in a lecture one time, and I was just like, "Oh, that's interesting." But that doesn't mean you have to have it.
You might be able to get to isolated doctrine like those, but to have a bigger picture where it fits within the puzzle. The way we view Sabbath, even though there's
whole meta-narrative.
like because there's other churches that believe in Sabbath, right? Seventh-day Baptist, but the way we approach Sabbath. And this is a whole other conversation, right? If you think it's an end time marker for the remnant church, right? That we're not even discussing that here, Jesse. I'm just saying as a point that the lens that we viewed and got to Sabbath doctrine is much deeper than a standard like isolated doctrine of Sabbath itself as like rest on the seventh day. It's deeper than that for Adventism.
Yeah, but also through the Sanctuary Doctrine, we also got to like pretty weird views of the Sabbath as like a seal. For like through that as a seal in the end for people to go to heaven, which inherently legalizes Sabbath keeping. I mean, I guess my point is that we get to good stuff, we get to bad stuff through it. And so I don't know if getting to those beliefs through the Sanctuary Doctrine inherently makes it necessary in order to get to those beliefs today, if that makes sense. And I think that because pretty much what happened to me, I'll just kind of tell my perspective on this. I got introduced to Scripture as like narrative, as like an overarching narrative that is going somewhere, not through Adventism, even though I recognize that was talked about a lot in Adventism, in Adventist circles when I was a kid. But like I got to that through Calvinists, through guys who were like, Anthony, I met this guy in a coffee shop and he invited us into something. He was a pastor. Invite us in like this group of pastors that get together. We're doing this like intensive thing, and we're reading through something called the Drama of Scripture. It's a book that talks about it, and it was like, oh yeah, this is what the Bible looks like. And so I recognized that I was definitely bringing some Adventist like presuppositions to this, but also it's all there. Like I didn't have to have the Sanctuary Doctrine to get to Sabbath. I didn't have it to get to State of the Dead or anything else, or even like an end time ethic of like what's going to get people. What's going to be sort of like an end time marker of people who are saved. I didn't get there through Sanctuary. I got there just through like the overall narrative of Scripture. So that's where I just see it differently currently. And right now where I'm honestly at is when I look at the belief, and I know this is like weird for me to say because I am an Adventist pastor, but I'm probably speaking for a lot more people than would admit it publicly. I'm down with most of it, actually. What I'm ultimately not down with is probably 1844. And
say more.
I don't think that the 1844 calculation and what's supposedly happening there, I'm not currently in a space where I say, yeah, no, totally, that's totally right. And I totally agree with it. I'm not there. I think the rest of it, at least certain interpretations of the rest of it, definitely. I'm there. Like investigative judgment, I mean, it's been used in some really bad ways to like make people feel really guilty. Oh no, like is God judging me?
Yeah.
But when it's I think described in its holistic picture throughout Scripture, I'm like, oh yeah, no, totally. I'm there with it. Right? But it's everything that gets filtered through 1844. Then I'm like, I'm not there. I'm not there. I don't think, and we get to 1844 based off of one interpretation. There's one key text that everything hinges on there, and it's whether you take the little horn of Daniel 8 to be either if you take it to be Rome, then it starts to get us to 1844. Yeah, right. But I don't think it's talking about that. I think it's talking about Antiochus Epiphanes, which is a whole another conversation we'll have to have. Yeah. I don't think it's talking about Rome. And if that's the case, then the whole 1844 thing falls apart.
Yeah.
And so and even then, like I'm not like 100% it's Antiochus Epiphanes, and therefore everything falls apart. However, I'm definitely not convinced that it's Rome, and because of that, 1844, if it does fall apart, basically hinging on the interpretation of that text, then that's an issue. But then second, I think that the idea of biblical prophecy is generally that we see what happens as human beings. We see what occurs in biblical prophecy because it's almost always an opportunity to look back and see that God knew what he was doing, right? It's visual to us at some point so that we can see, oh yeah, God knows what he's talking about. God knew what he was talking, like knew what he was talking about way before it ever happened. And we look back and we see it confirmed. 1844 is completely invisible to any of us. And so this is some of my things. I'm excited to have conversations about this, not in like a ready to prove other people wrong kind of way, but just to hear genuine answers to this. Because that's the part. Everything else, I'm like, yeah, sure, cool. But that one, I'm not there yet.
Yeah. And I think,
Yep.
we're all going to try to be honest as we go through this process of listening and trying to break down things like Daniel 8:14. I know, Jesse, we've had conversations about Ezekiel 28 with the king of Tyre. And
is that Discount Tire or is it
Discount Tire is fantastic, by the way. Such great prices. I've gone there pretty regularly.
Les Schwab 100%.
What if this was our ad
like
break
full
right now?
service?
I mean, if we got that Les Schwab money, hello.
We just said
I like Firestone. Firestone is solid.
Really?
we go from
never used
Ezekiel
Firestone.
28.
Costco,
Oh my
but
Lord.
Costco sells Firestone tires, so you can just go to Costco.
That's true.
But
Really?
Costco, here's the
usually
thing.
go to
Here's the thing I found
Costco.
out.
Discount
Here's the
Tires
thing I found out
has used tires.
Well, no, but here's what
Been marked
they have
out.
used tires.
Yeah,
Why would
they
you
have
buy
used
used
tires.
tires?
They're only slightly used, so that's why they can discount them so much. So they're like
Just a few
They
nails.
only have 10,000 miles left on them.
they're like 90% great, but they've been used a little bit.
Just
so
a
they can
warning
charge
to
them.
anybody:
like
Costco.
Anthony.
If you go to Costco and get your tires, you cannot. They don't rotate your tires for free afterwards. And so now I'm just a Les Schwab boy. I'm a Les Schwab boy because they do it all for free.
That's interesting because Walmart will rotate your tires for free. They did that for me.
Costco rotates your
Walmart?
tires.
I'm a little ashamed. I went to Walmart for my tires one time.
I
but
feel like if you get great value tires, there's
here's
gonna
the thing.
be
I was
an
in
issue.
seminary. It was a dark time. I was poor. You do what you got to do.
So King of
Circle
Tires,
back.
Sean.
King of Tire. Thanks to our sponsors at Les Schwab for the King of Tire sponsorship.
If only.
It says Ezekiel 28 all around the rim.
That'd be the most random sponsorship.
Imagine.
It's such a weird, what a weird
Sorry.
bridge to build with a
We gotta pitch
sponsor.
this. The King of Tyre, for
Just
anybody who
for the
doesn't know,
fun.
in Ezekiel 28 is one place where it's said that Ezekiel is talking about Satan, which is also something that I kind of disagree with that he's talking about there. But yeah, so we've disagreed on that, Sean.
Yeah. Again, as I go back to it, I think, Jesse, if you remove 1844, it does open a can of worms that is pretty significant, because then you go into, like, it's like the if this then that game with Adventism, where then you say, well, then, if that's true, then Ellen White's wrong. And if that's true, then,
What does it mean
does the Adventist Church really matter? Like, were we really spirit led? Like, that was the opening of, when we look at a historical narrative of, church history, we talked to someone on the series, that has that idea of, definitely holds to the idea, 1844 matters. And that, part of that is identifying we're a last day church. So the concept of last day church, concept of remnant, the validity of what Ellen White says, there's a lot that hinges on that being true. And I don't think I've even listed everything there. Obviously, still the way we interpret 2300 days, and all the events leading up to that, right? 1798, and the other events leading up to it, it all kind of falls apart for the 2300 day prophecy. And then that's what I mean by, like, the Adventist sweater. Like, you start unraveling
But this is what I mean, though. But this is what I mean is, like, if we're wrong, and I'm not even saying that we 100% are. I'm just saying that's where I'm at right now, on that dating specifically. If we're wrong, does it mean that everything falls apart? No. It just means that we have to adjust and refocus on find out what's important, right? Like we thought we had what was important. Okay, what's important now? and I don't think it changes everything to admit that we got something wrong. I think that it shifts what we focus on for sure. But is that the end of the world? I mean, I don't see how it would be.
I'm not saying
feel
it's
like
the end of
it
the
would be
world.
difficult,
I'm
be
not saying it's the end of the
challenging,
world, but I will say it would be a major shift. Like it would be a significant
Yeah,
Oh
absolutely.
shift within
I mean,
Adventism.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I guess my point is though, I would want to be part of a movement that could say, hey, I think we got that one wrong, and then move forward into something good, rather than just holding on to something because, oh no, what happens if
Right.
what happens if that's wrong? I'm not even saying that people are saying like, oh, we know it's wrong, but we're holding on to it. I'm just saying that I think some people are afraid of letting go, or hold so tightly to it, primarily because of what you're talking
Sure.
about.
Sure.
I also think like we're not maybe even fully articulating the level of what's built upon these types of presuppositions, because really, as Sean is saying, like if 2300 Day Prophecy is wrong and Ellen White is wrong, then that does unravel the Ellen White spool of the sweater.
Yeah,
Which-
but also,
But I feel like we just have to establish that that's like what traditional Adventism, that's the thing traditional Adventism is built upon.
Yeah, but I guess
essentially.
what I'm not saying is that it wouldn't be crazy and traumatic.
Right.
And I'm not even arguing that we should do this. I'm just saying, I hear what you're saying, Sean, about if we start unraveling this, potentially, if it was wrong and we started unraveling it, oh no, everything falls apart. It's like, yeah, I mean, it'd be a massive reckoning to have. It would be crazy if it was wrong. But it's also like a movement can survive that and can become something still very much what it was before, but just different. And so I guess that's why I'm not afraid of that idea.
Yeah.
I'm not afraid of that idea.
That's very true.
Though I'm also not saying that it's 100% wrong or anything. Like I'm not at that point.
Yeah. Well, and
I'm just
you know
not
what?
sold on it yet.
I'll even join you on that side for a bit to say, like, again, we're not going to spend all the time here to go through everything. We're going to break that down in our series. But like looking at Desmond Ford, again, he's an Adventist theologian professor from, especially in the 70s and 80s, was very prominent going to universities and speaking. And he was well known for his books and, stuff on Daniel, Revelation. And he got to a point where he disagreed with the investigative judgment, rejected that as a concept, and, was essentially like excommunicated from the church because he went public with that. And so, when you look at his life though, and you can dig into this a little bit more in different spots, a shout out to Matthew Lucio, Adventist History Project. He's got a series. By the time this releases, I'm pretty sure he'll be pretty much done with that series on Desmond Ford. And I would encourage you to go look at the background of that. But when I look at Desmond Ford, even after that moment when he's rejected by the church, he didn't want to leave. He didn't want to leave the church. He wasn't trying to even necessarily stir up trouble. And I know there's debates on how you feel about Desmond Ford, but he kind of still considered himself an Adventist after the fact of rejecting investigative judgment. So Jesse, in some ways, I relate to what you're saying, that, however you feel about Desmond Ford, like he never planned to leave. And so in that sense, there could be a possibility for someone to reject investigative judgment and still remain an Adventist, in some form. But
it's less about rejecting investigative judgment, and it's more like, I think the specific dating was wrong here. I don't think that Jesus moved compartments in the heavenly sanctuary at the specific date, but I don't, at least to me, it doesn't impact what Jesus is doing. It doesn't impact the story of the gospel. To me, it doesn't. To some people, it very much would. And so that's kind of the interesting thing about that. That's why that debate, I know, matters. I'm not trying to say this in a trivial way. Yeah. I'm saying this because this is what I am not convinced on currently. And there's a lot of people out there who feel the exact same way and are in Adventist, are hired in the sort of in exact same positions as me, are hired by the conference, all that stuff, but have a struggle with this. And as was the case with Desmond Ford back in the, when was that?
1980.
80s. Yeah. 1980s. And so that's why I'm saying it, because, even if it is right, it's important to recognize that a lot of people don't see it that way. And I think that there's a lot of people who just throw everything out like you've done, or not like you've done, like you've argued would happen.
Yeah.
If this falls apart, everything else falls apart. And I'm not in that camp. I'm just like, Adventism is still beautiful, even without this specific thing in it, if that's the case. But I get that not everybody sees it that way, and I'm still open. Like I want to be. I would love to believe it.
So
I'm open to the idea of it.
It's definitely. Oh yeah, you go, Eric.
oh no, you go first, Anthony.
Well, I was just gonna share where I'm at, but I want to hear what you.
Well,
Does Arnold Palmer have caffeine in it?
no,
Yeah,
because this is
black
gonna look
tea, I
real
think,
bad.
right?
Yeah, black
Pretty
tea.
sure it's black tea. Yeah.
Man, this looks real bad now. I'm saying I don't believe in 1844, and I'm drinking caffeine.
And you
Yeah,
drink
this is a
caffeine.
problem.
What a
There you go.
heathen! Man,
Dang.
the Jesuit infiltration at work.
Yeah.
No,
That's how they
okay.
get it.
So I feel like we've covered sort of the stakes of the investigative judgment or the sanctuary doctrine being
Mhm.
true or
Yeah.
false. But maybe I could ask, and I'll ask this question to you, Anthony, since you're up next.
Come over.
Why is it important outside of if it's wrong, then Adventism falls apart?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Why is
Anthony,
it
can
important
you
when it's
answer-
an inherently
Yeah.
a kind of theoretical, unable to be proven theology that's really just
Yeah.
like, we're theorizing what's happening in heaven? Why does it matter?
Mhm.
Why should I care?
Yeah, for sure. So,
Anthony, could you answer this through the lens of while also answering like where you're at on it?
oh boy. Oh, okay. Yeah. So I'll start with where I was, and then I'll get to that. I'll get to what you just asked, Eric. So for me, I think it's really interesting because my journey has been from kind of definitely where Jesse was for a really long time. I grew up with like lack of clarity on it. I would say I never understood it at all, really. Even as a pastor after undergrad, after going through theology, I don't think I understood really what the big picture idea was until seminary. And I think pre-seminary, I was 100% in the camp, all the camps that Jesse's saying. I doubted pretty much the textual integrity of pretty much, I would say, most of the building blocks of the Sanctuary Doctrine and investigative judgment. There are a few things that I would say, yeah, I can see it, but for the most part, I was like very much on the Antiochus Epiphanes camp, Little Horn, definitely not Rome. Even if I think I kind of felt like it could have been Rome for a time, but it's not anymore. Yeah.
Okay, I don't want to hijack you, but can you just like in 10 seconds explain what Antiochus Epiphany is?
Oh, sorry. That's a big word. Jesse will do a better justice, so I'll hand it over to him. He's a history buff.
Basically, the
10
idea
seconds.
is
I just want to know. Yeah.
basically in Daniel 7, you have all these things, and it gets to a horn, and that little horn is supposed to represent sort of like the papal power that rises up at a
In
certain
the
Yeah,
Adventist
I've heard that.
interpretation.
I've
in
heard that.
Daniel 8, there's a similar progression, but it doesn't have a monster that represents Rome. Out of one of the horns that is supposed to represent the Greek kingdoms that blow into four pieces, there's a little horn that arises out of one of those. Theoretically, I know there's different interpretations, but it's there's it's a little horn, so it must be the same as the one before, is one idea, or it's like, is the little horn representing a thing that can repeat but be different entities. But the idea is that the there's going to be a 30-second version, but the idea of Antiochus Epiphanes, he was the ruler of what's called the Seleucid kingdom. He oppressed the Jewish people intensely, sacrificed a pig in the most holy place, set up altars, tried to ban Judaism. It was a massive thing for the Jews at that time. And so it's a Jewish text. It's, that's where for me, it's like, it's more likely a Jewish moment that would have been incredibly religiously traumatizing when this guy did all of that to them. And so it seems to represent that to me. But in Adventist thought, it represents, I believe, is it the papal power or is it Rome?
Yeah.
Yeah. Papal.
It's Rome, but the papal power within Rome.
Yeah.
Yeah, the papal power within Rome, and that's
Yeah.
the idea. And then because of that, you can take the timelines out to 1844.
Yeah. And
I
there's
see, I see.
that's a whole argument. Like we'll probably take time later looking at the whole debates back and forth on how the
Yeah.
timeline
All
looks.
right.
Yeah.
Sorry to hijack you, Anthony. I was just
So yeah, all that to say, I was fully in like the camps Jesse's talking about of like seriously questioning pretty much all of the building blocks. I would say most of the building blocks, rather, of the investigative judgment, and even down to the idea that there is a physical sanctuary in heaven just felt like totally absurd to me. Like I couldn't. That was a major roadblock for me.
Which is the first line. There is a sanctuary
Yeah,
in heaven.
it's
That's
the first line. There is a
of
sanctuary in heaven. I just felt like that doesn't make sense. So I would say I went from that to probably feeling like not that Adventism would lose. Well, Eric, you asked, why is it important? Why does it matter? Right.
Yeah.
And I think where first is I think where I shifted to was first of all being fully indoctrinated, and by indoctrinated I mean yeah, I'm on the ship of the Sanctuary Doctrine for sure, and but I think why it's important is because the Adventist perspective, I think it's connected to what I was talking about earlier. The Adventist perspective to the text sees a different type of God than any other family of Christianity that comes before, a God who is not first and foremost power, but a God who is first and foremost love. And to me, the sanctuary message is a key component that shows that God actually is love, which ties back to like Ty Gibson's big idea, like God is love, therefore. So I would say sanctuary is one of those therefore. God is love, therefore, just like, yeah. So that's why I would say it's important. I think actually it shows probably one of the most unique and one of the most important and gospel-centric visions of God actually being love than really almost anything else in the Bible, aside from the cross. So yeah.
Wow.
So in other words, like it gives you
Adventist. You saved it with the aside from the cross. You were sounding so Adventist right there.
Yep.
Dang.
Aside from the cross.
No, that's a big statement though.
Because
the
sanctuary message is the gospel, but it expanded.
So
it's
for
you, it's the same thing.
It's like a very tangible representation of God is love.
It enables Adventists to say with more evidence than any other perspective that God is actually love and he's actually good.
So it's not that you can't get to
caveat.
It's not that you can't get to God as love before that, but you're saying it gives us the most
even more
compelling reason to state that as a fact.
Yeah.
But
absolutely.
There are some caveats to this.
Okay, wait, sorry, Jesse, before you say this.
Yeah.
And I think the shift for me was so drastic that I went from like, oh, this is almost definitely not in the text to like, frankly, like, holy crap, like we're doing way more than anyone else textually. Like the sheer degree of minutia and scholarly acumen, the sheer degree of thought that's been put into this, the sheer degree of like every question that you could ever have that has been answered, like frankly, like it shook me when I was in seminary. So
but there are people who went through the same exact classes as you that have not come out in the same way.
Well,
and you can always make that argument, Jesse. You can make that argument in any class.
No, but my point is,
there's people that took the same classes as oh my goodness, I'm done. Guys, it's late. I gotta go to bed.
Try again, Jesse or Eric.
It is late. Jarek.
My point isn't that is like a hardcore argument against it. I guess my thing is there are people who have taken those same classes and have said to me, Anthony thinks that. I did not feel the same thing. In that.
Here's the thing. I think what's important too is like the language that's used, because I'm coming from a generation of seminary that was taught totally new language of
I'm talking about people like contemporary to you.
Right.
Like other people that like we know that don't feel the same way.
And I agree with that. That's definitely true. And people disagree. And even for me, like there's certain things that I push back on where I'm not like fully whatever, things that I'm like, oh, this could be this. I'm not fully like black and white on a lot of things. But the big picture things, like,
yeah, for sure.
Professor Richard Davison, who's like the authoritative voice on Sanctuary right now, he just finished like his textbook on Sanctuary like a year and a half ago. So it's like really recent, like his theological kind of treatise on sanctuary. It's not like, this isn't language that's been used really in the Adventist church ever until like a year and a half ago. So that's why for me, he was able to present a compelling vision for me where I was like, oh yeah, I see it.
And that's the other caveat, is that I'm sorry, I know I'm sounding very, very negative about this, but this is very interesting to me, is that the language that you're talking about is completely different
Yeah.
than the language that is heard anywhere else. Is that
Yeah,
fair?
absolutely. Yeah. And that's why I think this goes
And
back to,
that's what's interesting about it to me, is like,
yeah.
is that the sanctuary doctrine, or is that like, is that, I mean,
Well,
is it the same thing?
It definitely brings up the idea that we could have cookie crumbs, so to speak, like breadcrumbs towards an idea, and frankly miss it for a lot of years. Like for instance, something like, oh man, I was about to spoil something. Something that Richard Davidson says is like he doesn't like the term investigative judgment. He rejects that term. He instead uses the phrase affirmative judgment.
Yeah.
Because judgment is good news. And so but that's a totally different framework than classical Adventism. Like classical Adventism, that's different language. And so to me, it illustrates and it brings up an idea that we could have like breadcrumbs towards a theology where we thought we had it, but then we're sort of like shifting. It's not like he's like totally out the window, like it's not Adventism, because it is really a lot of the same stuff, but it's like, I think it's a little closer to what's actually happening.
You've likened it,
That's
Anthony,
fair.
before. You've likened it to the idea of like the American concept of the Constitution.
Oh yeah,
the origins of our country. With that document of the Constitution, the way that we've interpreted it or amended it or added, the way that we truly make all men are created equal and everything else, that evolution happens. That doesn't mean that the Constitution, when it was originally written, was wrong. It just means that those breadcrumbs that were there, the very concepts and foundations of, what America was supposed to stand for and be, it wasn't fully realized or even maybe fully understood at the time when it was written down. But then over time, that evolution took place. Would you say that's a fair? I know that you've kind of mentioned or likened it to that, where you take the concept of the investigative judgment or the sanctuary, and there's an evolving process that takes place in Adventism to how we really take that concept and expand upon it and say, why does this matter?
Yeah.
What is the meaning behind this?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like we even have a built-in mechanism in Adventism for that, which is present truth.
Yeah.
It's like that's a built-in Adventist value, which is actually super progressive, that doesn't really exist in any other. Like for the Adventist thinker, truth, we don't have the truth. We are learning the truth always. The truth is always being revealed. And so to me, I think like I think there's, I do think there is it is akin to kind of the Constitution. Like, those guys Thomas Jefferson could write those words, but while still owning slaves.
Right.
That all men are created
Clear.
equal.
He wrote the Declaration of Independence.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Same idea,
So-
right? Same idea.
Same idea. I'm Canadian. But
Well, sorry, I actually had to look up. Wait, who wrote the Constitution to make sure
Yeah.
that Thomas Jefferson wasn't in there?
circle
Because
back.
if not, I was going to feel real stupid.
But yeah, Sean, I absolutely agree that could be a thing. And honestly, I think Davidson is the closest. I think he's the closest to articulating an idea of a God who's even better than we thought he was, in a way that is like gospel centric and super compelling.
Yeah.
So
And here's what I would say is, and we'll talk about this in some of our lead up episodes, but I will say that the idea that God, and we'll talk about this, that God would allow himself to be judged by others. It's like, Calvinism is another way of looking at scripture, which is pretty much like God is the highest authority. You can't question him. He does everything how he wants to do. That's pretty much, it has a very high view of God in some really good ways. But this idea of God that would say, hey, I'm going to actually lay out everything I've done before you, and you can make judgment calls on this. Like that's pretty compelling, right? So this is again where I say I'm not totally against these ideas or anything like that. For me, it just comes down to that one specific thing.
Yeah.
But it is also interesting because as we've talked, Anthony, and you've talked about, like, man, yeah, the way that it's talked about, the way the Sanctuary Doctrine as a whole is talked about by some of these key people, it's way more compelling. But it's challenging because what they are talking about is so, and it's like the antithesis almost to what has traditionally been talked about, that you're like, those are different things. I mean, I know
Yeah.
they're not actually, but like,
Well, in some ways they
or
are.
like at a core level, the
Uh-huh.
starting points, the text and the interpretations of these texts is not,
Yeah.
it's the same thing. But
Well, in
where
some
they
ways they
get,
are, I think.
well, I guess what I mean is like the way they're talked about, the language that's being used around a lot of the ideas is different, but the core
Yeah.
idea is similar, or the core starting point at least. But it does feel like different things, and so I guess that's part of the challenge for me as I've listened to you talk about it. I'm like, man, but that's just a different thing, you know. So I'm
Yeah.
interested in this whole series because we're going to walk through all of this and talk through. Well, pretty much, I guess we can just kind of talk about how we're
I
laying it
feel
out.
like maybe a final thought would be, I feel like all of this reveals, and this is really how I felt after seminary, was like, I remember like sitting with Dr. Davison and other professors for literal hours, and I would bring questions on the Hebrew, and I'm like, no, this doesn't make sense. Like, explain this, like, help me understand, like, just like for weeks, and like please, like I can't see it. And as like he walked me through, and others, like, they walked me through, I was left feeling at the end like, holy crap, like, why have I never heard this in my life? Like, why has this never been preached? Why has this doctrine been presented as the opposite of what it actually is? And to me, I think that's symptomatic of all Adventist doctrine. And this is what
Yeah,
we've
and that's
talked about
true.
with
Mhm.
with Ty Gibson a lot in that last episode of What is an Adventist, is like so many Adventist doctrines
Yeah.
have historically been presented as the antithesis of themselves. Like Sabbath has been presented as the antithesis of itself. Sabbath is the
Yeah.
gospel, but it's presented as legalism. Like,
Yeah.
huh? Like, how does that happen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and I think, honestly, I think the Sanctuary Doctrine is exactly the same. And I think that still, even with like where the seminary is now, it still hasn't been presented in a gospel-centric way, in normal people language. So I think
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
really where we're at.
But you believe in the potential, right? Ty talks about the latent
Yeah,
potential of
the latent
Adventism,
potential.
so there's that underlying hope, I think. But yeah, Jesse, you were going to talk about, just really quick, I think, as we're wrapping up, just a general breakdown of how we're going to do this series.
We're going to kind of split this. We're going to split this into sort of two parts. It'll be the same series, but two parts. We're going to talk about the sanctuary elements of this, and then we're going to talk about the investigative judgment side of it. So they are kind of two parts, because one just is talking about the sanctuary itself and some of the things that Jesus is supposed to do in there. And then the investigative judgment is almost like its own thing. So we use sanctuary doctrine as like an umbrella term, but we also then talk a lot about investigative judgment. There's kind of those two parts. One part is mainly sanctuary and Jesus' work there, and then the other is investigative judgment, which is part of the whole thing, but is like kind of a different thing, or enough of its own thing that we're going to talk about it separately.
Yeah.
And so we'll have different people on to talk through that. We're going to talk through, we'll have a couple of episodes that set up sort of foundational ideas that we kind of at least have to walk into it with understanding in order to build from there. But I mean, for the most part, we're going to try and separate it into those two things. And it'll be a little bit different than we normally do, because we like to be conversational. We like to have debates and have fun talking about stuff. And that will still be present in this. But there will be parts that are just trying to give us like the walkthrough of the doctrine, so that it's presented for people to understand. And then we'll probably have some like pushback or agreement points, or like, whoa, that's crazy, that's really cool. But it's not meant to be teaching explicitly, but there will be parts of that. So just know that this might feel a little bit different than our podcast is normally, but hopefully it's still good. So
That's the
It's
hope.
better.
That's the hope.
That's a hope it doesn't
hopefully it's
suck.
better.
We're going to be spending a long time on this, so you guys, we better have something
Yeah,
by
this
the end
one
of
is-
this.
This is gonna
Yeah.
have
So
to be journey.
actually, when we mapped it all out, we realized spreading all the episodes out. It's probably going to be, well, we'll probably work on this for like the next 3 years of the podcast. So it's going to be every 2 weeks for the next 3 years.
Buckle up, gentlemen.
I mean, I'm indoctrinated, but I'm not that indoctrinated.
Yeah. I hope our listeners are interested in this, because if not, they're not hearing anything else for like
We're screwed.
half a decade.
Yeah, no, it won't be that, but it will be a series of episodes, and we're going to try it. Some of them might be shorter, some of them might be it might just be a different format across the board, because we're just going to try and do this. We actually, the fun part about this is we started recording episodes on this, and then we're just like, wait, hold on,
Wait a minute,
this
is
topic is way too big to
It's
try.
a bigger pie than we thought it was.
Yes, and so so that's what we're going to do. I'm excited about it. Guys, let's make a bet. If I'm right, I get to go to heaven. And if I'm wrong, you guys can, and if I'm wrong, Jesus will intercede for me before the Father, and I'll still be there. So
This bet is
my
assuming one of us is God.
No, that's my bet.
You
Is
just
that
have
either
to
way, I'm good.
just buy us new tires.
From Discount Tire.
No, I want those new tires.
Are those
Hey.
worth?
I'll get you all great
I'm a
value
pastor,
tires.
brother.
Great.
They have to be worth at least $2,300.
That's
Not $1,844.
No, those are the great value tires. Can't go with
Those are
those.
great value.
That's what I'm paying. $18.44.
No, that's the
in biblical
$490.
prophecy, every dollar is actually
Every dollar's
$1,000.
Every dollar's a day.
$1,000. So
Dang,
$23,000.
those would be like Formula One level tires. Dang.
Yeah, it's
Well, guys,
it's late. We're recording another
we're
after
gonna-
dark session here.
we're gonna go into this, and we're gonna find out what the deal is with the Sanctuary Doctrine. I'm excited about it, and
Jesse, imagine
want?
if at the end of this you get fully convinced and I get unconvinced. I'm like, wait, never mind.
Eric and I pulled that off once on a Facebook post. We took two opposing views,
Oh, I remember this.
and after
Wait, was this
it
the
was like in the
ziggurat?
comments.
after
in the comments,
like 100 comments, we both switched sides by the end.
Eric's like,
It was
yeah,
the
I
most
think you're right. So I
confusing.
was like, yeah, I disagree with my original stand.
no, it wasn't even that. It was that they slowly over 100 comments slowly shifted to where now Eric was making arguments that Sean was making at the beginning, and Sean was making arguments that Eric was making. And here's the great part about this. In our friend group, that is one of the funniest. That's one of those things that we talk about is very funny. It's not funny to anybody else. Nobody saw it. Even the people who are reading through it are just like, "What is happening?" But it's funny because you guys inconvenience someone so much with the amount of notifications.
It was just a stranger. It wasn't one of us. It wasn't on our Facebook page. Well, not a stranger. We know who it was. But it wasn't one of us. We were.
They probably know who it is.
It was
who they are.
These were the glory days of Facebook.
Yeah.
Like those,
So
that was a
all of
previous
that
era.
said, these guys who can barely be serious are going to try and have a conversation about the investigative judgment
By
and
God's
Sanctuary
grace.
Doctrine. So
Yeah, we're gonna try.
good luck.
Thanks for sticking with us.
Welcome to the party.
Welcome to the party. Hey friends, you've just been listening to another episode of Seeking What They Sought. I'm one of your hosts, Anthony Leiter, and on behalf of all the guys, we just want to say a big thank you to all of you who have come alongside us in our journey to have honest conversations about Adventism. We appreciate each one of you. As usual, if you haven't already, give us a follow on Instagram. It is kind of like our home base, social media-wise, and if you'd like to stay up to date on the episodes that we're posting or just different things that we're doing, you can follow us there. We're also kind of like low-key a meme account, and we post silly videos and other stuff, so give us a follow. We would love it. Also want to say a big thank you to our patrons, and we're really grateful to each one of you for helping us make quality content. So to each one of you, a big thank you, and if you'd like to follow us on Patreon, you can. There's a link in our Instagram bio if you'd like to support us. Thank you so much. Last but not least, if you could you leave us a review on iTunes or Spotify, wherever you listen, because it really helps us actually in the algorithm to help new people get their eyes on the podcast. So if you could just go in, give us a little, hopefully a 5-star review, but be honest, that really helps us just in the algorithm, the way that these things work these days. So we really, really appreciate it. All right, I think that's it for now, friends. So we will see you next time on Seeking What They Sought.